Former Air Force and commercial pilot Bill Hensley has flown and landed the Boeing 767-400, a plane similar to the Boeing 777. He's here to shed some light on the plane crash as well for us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
So when you hear Paul talking about the fact that it looks like pilot error, that they came in for what he said a bad landing, and you see the damage, what do you discern from all that information?
Yeah, of course, everything that we say is preliminary, and we are going to find out exactly what happened. But my first instinct is one of two things happened. Either the pilot was coming in very steep initially. This is a model, by the way, of a 767-400, which is virtually identical to the 777. Cockpit's identical. It's just about 8 feet shorter. Two things can happen in a scenario that we see that have possibly at San Francisco. If a pilot is coming in too steep, and he makes a correction at the last moment, close to the end of the runway, he can aggressively pull back on the control wheel. If he does that, the tail of the aircraft rams into the runway, or in this case, the rocks and the jetty. Also, if he's coming in too low, and he decides to try to get out of this situation of being too low, the engines are back, he pushes up the throttles to increase the power. There's spool-up time in a jet engine that's not instantaneous, so even if he rotates, the airplane is going to maintain its plane of flight for several seconds before he can get away from the ground. Both of those scenarios could result in the tail ramming into the rocks and breaking off.
A lot of reports are saying there's no way that there were any engine defects. Do you agree with that? Do you think that this was simply pilot error? And if so, this pilot, he's been in this business for years. So how could something like that happen? Two
great questions. It's a little early. I heard that Asiana did make a statement that there were no engine malfunctions. They may have looked at preliminary data from the flight data recorder, and that's possible. But it is easier than one would think when you're doing a visual approach after a 12-hour flight, particularly to San Francisco, which is designated as a special airport, in that there are some unusual characteristics. There's terrain off the end of the runway, and also as you do your approach, you're doing it over water. When you're approaching over water, you lose depth perception and ability to judge your sink rate. Now, you have instruments in the airplane and experience to counterbalance that, but if you let that get out of control, that's one of the factors that could contribute to a steep approach and a quick correction at the end and result in a tail contact.
So if you had instruments to look at, would you as a pilot be thinking maybe there was an issue with the instruments as well, that they weren't jiving up with what he thought was happening with the time frame that he had to land there?
No, that would not be my instinct, because the instruments are there as a reference. And look at it this way: when you drive your car and you're in a zone that's maybe 45 miles an hour, you know what about 45 miles an hour feels like in your car. You're not constantly looking at your speedometer. You don't have to, right? Same thing with an airplane and a pilot doing a visual approach. You have so much experience that you can literally look at a piece of concrete and you know where you may need to put the airplane to touch down at a certain point. So I would say that there's minimal indication that there were engine instruments or instrumentation problems, and if there were, he could override it because he was doing a visual approach and he would be using visual references, and even if the instruments were inaccurate, he would be okay.
Based on the call-in, too, as well, to the air traffic controllers, what did you make from that call and what they said as they were coming in? They said they were making emergency landing.
Well, you know, I just heard that and noticed there was no timestamp on the communication. So what I gather from that is when he was calling for emergency vehicles and when the tower said emergency vehicles are on the way, that to me indicates that that call was made after he touched down.
Now, I know this would just be your opinion, but what do you think happened? Like we saw when the plane had landed, that the top of the airplane was not charred just yet. It engulfed in flames shortly after, but yet there were 2 fatalities. The fatalities came, they said they were sitting at the back of the plane where the tail had ripped off, but we all know, those who have been on airplanes, at the very back of the plane, that's where the crew members are, that's where they have set up with the drinks and the coffee and the restrooms back there. So what do you think happened to these 2 16-year-old girls that lost their lives?
Yes, and of course those of us in the aviation community and everybody, our hearts go out to those, to the families of those. But remember, crew members are stationed all throughout the airplane. That's a federal aviation regulation. You have to have flight attendants within certain distance of the passenger, so you have some seated in the forward, in the mid, and in the aft. And it looks like there was an actual clean break at the tail. It came off at a stress point, one of the points where the fuselage is joined together with the tail, what we call the empennage, which is this part of the airplane. And it could be anything from, they could have exited the after contact was made with the runway and after the tail broke off, they could have actually been thrown out, or it could have been anything from an early evacuation and they could have panicked and gotten out of the airplane and gotten injured, or got killed inside the airplane and then thrown out when the doors were open or something. I mean, there's a lot of different scenarios.
Yeah.
Oh, right. There's
Yeah.
so much information. We really appreciate your perspective, Bill Hensley, coming in to tell us, especially in light of the fact that you're flying a plane that was so similar
Yes.
to the one that landed there,
My pleasure.
crash landed.
Yeah, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you.